Okay, well, as everyone is getting logged in, yeah, I'm Ben Warner. I lead product marketing at Privado.ai. We're happy to have you for another webinar. Today's topic, yeah, it's one of the biggest privacy law developments in Europe since GDPR. We're talking about the new UK Data Use and Access Act, and we have two um, experts on this topic here with us today, and let them introduce themselves in a second. So yeah, today's webinar will be recorded, of course. Everyone will get access to the recording afterwards. We will send the slides afterwards. Please send questions to the Q&A throughout the session. We will try to answer them throughout, and any ones we don't get to, we'll try to answer at the end. So we want to make this interactive, and yeah, we're excited to get started. So I will let Robert and Nick introduce themselves. But yeah, we've worked with Robert in the past. He's been a great partner, and it's been really uh, yeah, good expert on all topics privacy law related, particularly in Europe. So Robert, I'll let you get started.
Thanks, Ben. Hi, everyone. I'm Robert Bateman. I am a senior partner at Privacy Partnership, and we provide consultancy training on data protection and privacy and AI related topics, and also legal advice through our associated legal firm, Privacy Partnership Law. So really good to be here. As Ben says, I've worked with Privado in the past. I used to do the Privacy Corner newsletter and videos. If anyone used to enjoy those, I've handed that back over to Privado. Now I'm producing content for Privacy Partnership. I'm joined here by Nick today, Nick Tyler. Nick, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Hi, everyone. I'm Nick Tyler, and thanks, by the way, to Ben and to Privado AI for setting up this call and for inviting me to join Rob. Yes, I'm Nick Tyler. I'm a qualified solicitor, and I'm a senior privacy counsel at Privacy Partnership Law. So I work with Rob, and I have been doing data privacy for a very long time, going back to 1998 when I first joined the what was then called the Office of the Data Protection Registrar, now the ICO. That's when we had the second generation of laws back in 1998, Data Protection Act. And we're going to be talking about what is the third stroke fourth generation in the UK, certainly. So I was the chief legal advisor at the Commissioner's Office, and then my career after that has focused on pharmaceutical and life sciences, where I've worked in regional and global data protection roles, both at AstraZeneca and at Takeda Pharmaceuticals. And currently I'm working as a contractor and working for two pharmaceutical companies, supporting their data privacy efforts as a data protection officer. So,
Great. Nick, you
over
bring
to
a
that,
lot of experience to the table then. And while I share my slides,
yeah.
given that you've been involved in UK data protection since, as you say, the second generation of data protection laws,
Mm.
of course, with the Data Protection Act 1998, what do you think about the Data Use and Access Act? Is it
Okay.
as big a shift as we saw in 2018, or is it perhaps slightly more measured than that?
Yeah, I'd definitely go with the more measured approach to it, Rob. Yeah, and really, I'm going to learn quite a bit, I think, from this call from you, because my practice has been sort of focusing on sort of global privacy programs and implementing principles and policies from a global perspective. And GDPR is obviously a big driver of that. And obviously, at the heart of the UK legislation still remains the UK GDPR. And that's been always my focus. And I think I've probably lost touch with some of the finer detail of sort of UK legislation, which I knew back like back of my hand back in the days when I was actually working at the ICO, which you'd expect. But things have moved on. And so I definitely think there's an opportunity to refocus on what uh, is being introduced with some changes, which are making the UK law, shall we say, a bit more modern and in touch with the practicalities of some of the challenges that data protection law faces us as practitioners, but it's very much an evolution. It's not a revolution. I think we need to get a sense of proportion here and also be very wary of the fact of sort of adopting this on a global basis because it is very much UK law, I would say.
Yeah.
I do think though that it does set a very good example going forward for potentially some adaptations in how other laws may approach certain tricky
Yes,
subjects.
I agree. It's an evolution rather than a revolution. I think there are some important bits there for UK companies and particularly those operating um, within the UK and also other jurisdictions might need to think a bit about whether they need to adjust things in that particular region. I think you can probably get away with not doing that for the most part because a lot of these changes are kind of permissive rather than new compliance obligations. So there might be some perhaps opportunities there for some businesses, as we'll see. Now, I'll just work my way through the slides. These are quite text heavy, but as Ben says, we'll share a copy of these and Nick and I will sort of talk around them. Just to emphasize, first of all, that data protection and privacy is only one part of this law, part 5. So that amends the UK GDPR, the Data Protection Act 2018, and the Privacy and Electronic Communications Regulations 2003, or PECA, as we call them. And also part 6 is quite relevant, which changes the ICO that you once worked for, Nick, when it was the Data Protection Registrar. There is some other interesting stuff here. I mean, access to customer and business data. I did a video about that a couple of weeks ago with our colleague Boris Voitan. This kind of smart data switching stuff that will be very relevant to some sectors, and also the verification services stuff. But overall, the data protection amendments to the privacy and data protection law are just one part of the bill, and there are some other important bits too. I keep saying bill. Do forgive me. It has passed now. King Charles has approved, and so it's now an act. I
Hence the
must.
second A. Hence the second A. On
That's
that
right.
subject, I was just saying to Rob earlier when you put in DUA with 2 A's into Google, the AI overview comes up with something I actually didn't know. Forgive my ignorance, but DUA actually refers to supplication or prayer in Islam. It's a direct appeal to God, Allah. So, but further down, it also says Data Use and Access Act. It's also worth noting that DUA can refer to the Data Use and Access Act
Ah,
2025, a piece of legislation in the UK. So, yeah, it's certainly not hallucinating in that respect. But yeah, second, shall we say, to this call for prayer, which maybe some people feel they need to even interpret and understand where all these uh, 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 elements fit into the law, which is right, isn't it, Rob? There are 3 different sources of the UK legislation now, effectively. If you wanted to actually, I know it's been pulled together into a single
yeah.
sort of healing schedule, but actually we're talking about sort of a bit of a patchwork of 3 different legislative instruments now that contain the UK data protection law, which is very complex for practitioners.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm quite impressed we actually got a mention as the second item in the AI overview, given how important
Uh,
that call to prayer must be for so many people. But yes, you're right, Nick. So this law, it's not a new act in itself. It makes lots of little piecemeal amendments to the existing law. And that is quite confusing. I've been following it now for a long time, so I got to know it over various drafts, and that was quite helpful actually. But you have to cross-reference it with various other bits of the law. It's coming into effect in stages, so I think the first bits to take effect will be in a week or so, and that includes, I think, changes to the privacy regime. So just to touch on some of the main things we're going to look at, we're not actually covering this in detail, but it does update some definitions. So we get a definition of scientific research. There are some fiddling around with the purpose limitation principle and consent as well, mostly relevant to the consent, the context of research. There's a new legal basis. That's probably the most exciting for data protection nerds like myself and yourself as well, I guess, Nick, a brand new legal basis for processing called recognized legitimate interests that we'll look at in a moment. Some changes, kind of clarifications to the data subject rights, quite mostly doesn't, well, we'll see how important those are. Cookies, this is also quite substantial. There are some new exceptions to consent for certain cookies and similar technologies, pixels and so on, but they're very heavily caveated, so very much not a license to go and do whatever you want with ad tech and so on. And there will be a new test for international data transfers, which actually could have quite a big impact on how data flows out of the UK. These are just some of the areas that are changed, but I think they are probably, well, they're the most interesting for me. So we're going to focus on these. There's also a couple of bits that we might mention towards the end around non-profits as well that I haven't listed here. So Nick, if you're happy, then we'll talk a bit about data
Please.
subject rights. Now, I'm going to explain how the law changes things or doesn't or clarifies things. And then I'll ask you if you think it's going to make very much difference in practice and what your experience is working with companies in this respect and whether you think this will kind of help them. So basically, the law around when you have to respond to a request under the data subject rights, so whether it's access or erasure or rectification, the law specifies when the kind of clock starts. And you'll notice I've got a typo on the slide there. The Act clarifies when the clock starts, not the bill. So it's the latest of either when you receive the request, when you have verified the data subject's identity, or when, if you want to charge a fee, if you're justified in doing that, the data subject has paid the fee. The Act also sort of explains when it's possible to rely on the 2-month extension. So it says for either complex or numerous requests. And also there's this kind of new pause mechanism where if you start looking into the request and you find that it's not sufficiently clear what the data subject wants, you can ask them to specify or narrow it down. You pause the clock for that period and then you restart it once they answer. There's also one more thing to mention in this respect. The Act explicitly states that a data subject is only entitled to information that the controller can provide based on a reasonable and proportionate search. So this amendment has actually already taken effect, and it comes from case law, existing case law that from several years ago. So Nick, what's your impression of this? Do you think it's going to change much for UK organisations?
It should give reassurance that what has been, as you say, developing, constantly evolving case law and guidance from the ICO is actually sort of, as I say, codified within that, and it's contained, which is really, really helpful to have that for practitioners. But as you say, it shouldn't change in practice. And I think you can say the UK and practitioners are most exposed to the nuances and the challenges of, in particular, data subject access requests. And I can certainly say from my experience, both at the regulator, right from the earliest days, subject access right was very much a focus of the guidance and awareness that the office produced, and then it was picked up in terms of awareness by the public, and it was picked up by the public, their lawyers, I think, in terms of exercising those rights. And right from the sort of early 2000s, there was case law that's been developing the sort of rules and limitations around the scope of subject access requests in particular, and then we sort of evolved further with sort of freedom of information requests, and I think they almost merged in terms of some of the practices and some of the terminology, because the regulators are the same in the UK. My experience from working in a global company, where across Europe, these rights are available across Europe, but in practice, and I do speak from the perspective of working for pharmaceutical life sciences companies, and I recognize that maybe not generally consumer facing, and so they probably will compared to other industries maybe not get as many requests from individuals, but I think it's a fair observation to say that when it comes to these subject access requests and the sort of details of managing those, the majority will come from UK and more recently, I think Irish citizens, residents, and I've had limited visibility exposure to requests being made, sort of particularly by sort of disgruntled employees, you might say, that are outside the UK and Ireland, where I think
Interesting.
it's almost become, I think it's part of the culture, part of the employment law culture as well, and the lawyers involved, that it's used a little bit as a weapon. That's always been the case to some extent. The right
Interesting.
of
Yeah. So
taxes. So I think we have to bear in mind that and a lot of these rules have been developed to sort of address some of the challenges in dealing with some really difficult requests that are made for unspecified amounts of data concerning
yeah.
employees.
Certainly, the employment context provides some of the more challenging data subject requests for sure. I mean, they can be very broad in scope, and often the data subject is aggrieved with
Yeah,
the employer, so they can get quite messy. I guess
yeah,
that this, I suppose, I would say that even though, well, for a start, this is case law already in the UK, so it's kind of part of the common law. It's now been put into a statute. I don't think it really lessens the obligation on organizations to have a good kind of data mapping strategy and know where all the data is. For most intents and purposes, reasonable and proportionate is still going to be quite a high bar, I think. Um, it's not going to be accepted as an excuse. And the ICO can actually be quite strict when it comes to access requests, and they do often take the data subject side in my experience. So I think it doesn't really change that much from an organizational perspective. It's certainly not a free license to reject subject access requests. And if you're a consumer facing organization, like you're saying, Nick, most of your experiences with B2B operations, then I think it's still good to have a really solid process for uh, receiving and processing subject access requests. In particular, I think if you're, for example, if you're a software company or whatever, that might get these quite routinely, quite relatively straightforward requests. This will be very helpful, I guess, for health and social care, maybe for employers in some contexts where the requests can really get quite messy and complex. It will give them more confidence anyway, like you say. Um, Thank you, Nick. So should we talk a bit about the next area, uh, the recognized legitimate interests? So I'm sure you've heard about this. Nick and some on the call might have done. It's basically it's a new legal basis that is a bit like legitimate interests, but slightly different. So as you'll know, legitimate interests allows controllers to process personal data where it's in their interests or the interests of a third party, but they have to make sure that their interests outweigh the rights and freedoms of or any risks to the data subject. So you have to do this kind of balancing test where you have your own interests in one column and the data subjects in the other. And if it's too risky, then you need to look for another legal basis or not do the processing ultimately. Now, the recognized legitimate interests are different. These are things that the government kind of thinks are legitimate by default, or Parliament, I should say, because this is in the statute itself. The government can actually add things to this part of the law, so we might see new grounds in future. But basically, you do not have to do that balancing test to rely on this legal basis. This is kind of stuff you can do, usually if it's necessary for a specific purpose, but it's stuff you can do by default. It's legitimate by default. So these are things that the Parliament or the government or whatever considers quite low risk and sort of generally beneficial. So just to reiterate that, you normally would have to identify a legitimate purpose. Here, these purposes are all legitimate by default, by law. You will still have to, in most cases, demonstrate that the processing is necessary, but you will not have to balance your interests against the individual's interests for most of these. Well, for all of them, in fact. I'm told there is an echo on the line. I hope that's not me. Maybe we can mute ourselves when not speaking. Let me just run through what these legitimate interests are quickly, Nick, and then I'll get your opinion on what the bill does here, what the law does here. So firstly, you can process personal data if a public authority or a public body says they need data from you to fulfill their own public task. You have a legitimate interest in giving them the data. So that's a little bit complicated, but it's quite broad. If, for example, a public body, a council or something comes to your organization and says that they need you to give them some personal data, you basically have a license to hand it over under this part of the law. There's also these quite broad recognized legitimate interests. So they include national security. You can process personal data if you need to protect national security, public security or defense, for emergencies, and for prevention, detection of crime, and for safeguarding purposes. So these are all things that the government thinks you should be able to do by default, and you don't have to worry about any pesky sort of balancing test in order to do them. So Nick, what do you think about this idea? Do you approve of this, or do you think it could cause issues?
I wholeheartedly approve of this. It's not before time, I might add. I know it's not the same, and maybe you can comment on that, Rob. But you know, just from the 1998 legislation, when introducing the legal bases, both in terms of what we now term Article 6, Article 9, and GDPR terms, there was always a substantial public interest was one of the, sorry, a public interest and a substantial public interest, and that was always to be as delineated or described further in sort of secondary legislation or member state legislation, which never really arose. So it was very much limited, to public authorities, and but you always had to read into certain situations which you could safely say were in the public interest. Here, you might say there is now something that's been recognised as a legitimate interest without further analysis, because it's sort of just understood by everyone, I think, in these terms, and that can safely then be relied upon by data controls in the private sector. And I think what it actually avoids is quite a number of situations that you read about in the news or you come across in your day-to-day life where for whatever reason, data protection gets in the way of whether it's a disclosure of data amongst public authorities. You see these situations where data protection is blamed for a failure of agencies to share data or of private companies to share data to the police, let's say, without further orders. So if it short circuits that sort of situation for very good reasons and gives certainty to controllers, then it's a good thing. Again, I just have to flag the fact, of course, that this is just the UK. So as much as this is available in the UK specifically, or will be, it's not to be relied upon outside the UK, and where legitimate interest assessment is still relevant. And we just read about a case in, I think it was Estonia, where the Data Protection Authority confirmed, or the courts confirmed, that they are able to demand access to a legitimate interest assessment and review that. And certainly it's part of the accountability principle, isn't it? Legitimate interest assessment now. And yes, it's an added burden for businesses and for data protection officers and support, but that's what we have outside of the UK in these scenarios even. Any
Very interesting.
information on that?
So I didn't know about that. Was it Estonian case where the DPA demanded a copy of the legitimate interest assessment? I'm sure there are controllers out there who, I wouldn't like to say they don't do such assessments, but maybe they haven't carefully documented them. So that's an interesting case in that respect. We've got a couple of questions about this actually, Nick. So David asks, does the new Act have a definition of the term defence purposes, as the previous legislation did not have one? I'm going to roll that up with the question from Nana. How broadly is the recognised legitimate interest for detecting or preventing crime interpreted? Is it a green light for cameras for detecting shoplifting risks, etc.? Now, actually, as far as I'm aware, the Act does not define these things. I could be wrong, but I remember checking previously and finding that these terms are left undefined and they are therefore quite broad. So I'll ask you, Nick, do you think that this is you know, if you're allowed to process personal data by default to detect, investigate, or prevent crime, do you think the government or the parliament is trying to allow for more CCTV and shoplifting mitigation, that kind of stuff with this provision?
I think we have to tread very carefully in that area, particularly when you think of the prevalence of ring doorbells and private CCTV, and the fact that it's now routine, isn't it, for in police to ask owners of dash cams and ring doorbells to make their data footage available to them. But potentially we've got this situation where you have a domestic exemption in terms of individual use, but question whether that is still exempt from Data Protection Act when it's facing the public spaces, which I don't think it is, and I don't think the regulator would accept that that's purely private use where there is a sort of CCTV effectively, which through whichever mechanism in a public space. So I think it's still got to be under the auspices of an investigation by the police or appropriate authority. But I think it certainly would remove certain barriers or concerns and remove or lower the risk in sharing that data in those circumstances, how I would put it.
Yeah, I think we probably will see people relying on this for stuff like CCTV. Whether or not that is valid, I think we're just going to have to see how it plays out, really. I suppose what this stuff intends to do is to extend some of the public task type processing that public bodies have been able to do, like you mentioned, Nick, into the private sector, because they will now have recourse to rely on these things. I guess some of this stuff would have previously been done under exemptions to the Data Protection Act, like the safeguarding stuff. But again, it's about giving controllers a bit more confidence, I think, to do stuff that that Parliament generally approves of. But as you say, very important to caveat that this is in particular, this is UK only. I think a lot of it will be most relevant domestically anyway. Emergencies, that one's quite tightly defined. Civil Contingencies Act has a very long definition of emergencies and what constitutes an emergency. But yeah, defence, national security, crime, these are all quite broad terms. So we do have a bit more wriggle room to do stuff for those purposes now under this provision.
In answer to David's question, I don't believe there's a specific definition of defence purposes. That's just wrapped up in context of national security defence. So, yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if there is under case law or something, but certainly not in the definitions of the Act. So for most purposes, I think they're keeping it intentionally broad, and the government can add new bits to this via secondary legislation. I think it has to be approved by Parliament, but that's normally a bit of a rubber stamping sort of job, I think, when it comes to government regulations. So let's take a look now at how this law affects cookies and similar technologies. And many people will hate me for this, but I'm just going to use cookies as a shorthand for accessing or storing information on the device in some cases. So just a reminder of the current law in the UK, which is, of course, from the e-privacy directive, which we implemented long before Brexit. So you basically need consent by default to access information stored on someone's device or to store information on someone's device or their terminal equipment, as it's called under the law. So there are two, what I'm calling classic exceptions to this, and there are three new exceptions under the DUAA. You can also get consent. So consent has the UK GDPR standard, so it has to be freely given, not specific, informed, all that stuff. So it's quite a high bar, and that's why, well, it's not fair to blame the GDPR for cookie banners, but it does have it is partly relevant because you have to get opt-in consent under the GDPR effectively. So the two classic exemptions, as I'm calling them, stay. So they are just a reminder. You can store information or access information on someone's device or use cookies to facilitate the transmission of a communication over a network. So basically, to make your website or app or whatever function. It's very tight, that exemption. It's not for anything for your benefit, really. It's mostly just to make your stuff work properly, or where strictly necessary for providing a service requested by the user. So that applies to things like remembering logon details, I guess. Again, quite a tight exception there. Has been interpreted very narrowly in the EU in particular. The new exceptions, here's one, and I'm calling this analytics, but that might be a little bit broad. Basically, I think it is analytics, to be fair. You won't need consent to collect statistical information about how your own service or website is used with the aim of making improvements to it. Now, there is a caveat that I'll explain before handing back to you, Nick. So this could include counting impressions, identifying popular pages, spotting bugs. You have to give people an opt-out. It has to be simple and free way to object. And you have to give people clear and comprehensive information about what you're doing. And obviously, if someone opts out, you have to opt them out. You can actually use a third party for this. Well, you can use another person to help you with this, but they can only use the information collected to help you make improvements to your website or service. And also, a funny little quirk in the wording of the law, I think it's only available to information society services, which is effectively paid online services. Tash Whitaker pointed this out on LinkedIn, a very good UK consultant, so I'll credit her for spotting that. So I think this actually means you can offer an opt-out for some analytics, but you have to put any service provider under a data processing agreement, in short. Nick, what do you think about this idea? I personally don't think it's such a bad idea.
Anything that can sort of simplify compliance with the cookie legislation, if I can put it that way, is a good thing. But again, I just have this concern, Rob, that it will only go so far. It can only be applied in the UK context, and presumably also just an exclusively UK context. How does this impact on a website that is visible, accessible, which all websites are, aren't they, globally? How can you at one time take advantage of some of the additional exceptions here and relaxations, you might say, in the rules on one hand for the UK, and yet still be subject to much stricter requirements from a sort of certainly European perspective, which that troubles me. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I think it's going to be difficult to. I don't know how many companies are going to want to kind of geo restrict access to their website for the UK specifically to take advantage of this. This is pointed out by Maxine in the chat. Will the addition of the 3 new exceptions actually make it more onerous for website owners, as they'll need to offer an opt-out and further classification of essential and so on cookies? Yes, I think it could complicate things, but I think in some cases it actually won't. If this is all you want to do, if you're not interested in doing marketing cookies or anything like that, if you just want to do some basic analytics, which is true of some of my clients, actually, they're not particularly interested in marketing. They just want to make sure the website works okay. Then you can, I think you can, this might be helpful, quite frankly. So I'll just show the other exceptions, and then I'll hand back to you, Nick, some other thoughts on this. But the next one is about the appearance of your website. So you won't need consent to store, access information to adapt how your website displays on different screens, or to enhance the appearance or functionality of your website. This is sometimes called responsive design. Again, you can do this on an opt-out basis, and you need to make that simple and free and give people information about what you're doing. The final one is probably only relevant to emergency services, but actually isn't restricted to them in its scope. So you won't need consent to basically detect where a device is located to access the GPS coordinates or whatever if someone is requesting emergency assistance. So that's probably going to be most relevant to emergency services. Now, just to show one further slide, and then we'll have a chat about this, Nick. I think you might be able, I think you still need a cookie banner for these purposes. This is not legal advice or any sort of advice, but I think you might get away with something like this if you're only using cookies for these purposes, where you basically just have a reject option and you don't have an opt-in option. So you can set these cookies by default. This is the idea. This is what they're trying to allow here for the statistical cookies, for example, and you can just allow the user to reject them. And as long as you give them the information, I think you could implement something like this. But like our delegate or the person in the audience says, it might just complicate things for some companies, and you might just want to stick to consent across the board. What do you think, Nick, with the kinds of
Yeah,
companies you work for? Do you think they will do
I'm
that?
I'm firmly in the camp of Maxine there. I just can't. It's so limited in terms of what a website would be able to do to be, shall we say, fully able to take advantage of these relaxation exceptions. That yeah, almost can you call it almost like I don't know. Well, it's a small business. It's probably wrong, but it's almost like a former small business exemption, a very basic website type exemption, isn't it? It's all, um, but for companies that I've certainly worked for, and my experience, I can't. When you're having to sort of implement something technically, operationalize something technically across the globe, certainly across Europe, if there's going to be some differences, and to have a sort of UK instance that explores or is able to maybe take advantage of some of these. I'm not sure it's worth the time, effort, and investment in doing so, to be honest with you. But there we go. It's showing some willing, isn't it, on the part. And again, a lot of these things, I think it's a general theme, isn't it? These are great sort of ideas to tinker around and address some of the obvious issues. I mean, the reality is that the PEC at the European level, it's going back to law from 2000. It's not never been amended. It's never got that. So clearly is needed some tinkering around and changes. So anything that can do that, great, but it needs to be across Europe. It can't just be a sort of a Brexit UK solution, I think.
So we're probably waiting for the Europeans to make some changes. Well, the e-privacy regulation, I think, has been ditched altogether.
Yeah, yeah. Not for the
So
first time.
I think they were considering splitting it out so that they had one law that would amend the cookies rules and one
Mm.
that applied to kind of security, intelligence processing, that kind of stuff. But as with everything in the EU,
Yeah.
it's been very slow to manifest. So I wouldn't advise that people hold their breaths for that. Yeah, I mean, the original version of this act, the Data Protection and Digital Information Bill, went a bit further than this, and they proposed some additional exceptions for security. And there was never, apart from the original consultation and Boris Johnson's kind of blithering, headline grabbing assertions, there was never a consideration to get rid of consent for marketing cookies. I don't think that was always deemed to go too far. I do think
Yeah.
some
Oh no, I
organizations.
didn't know whether that's the point at which they maybe flagged this the charities element, or is that a bit of a
Yes, that's right. So I haven't got a slide on this, Nick, but as you say, charities do have a new opportunity under this act to do some direct marketing without consent. So do you want to explain a bit about that, Nick, how the soft opt-in works?
in effect? I mean, it was always the case that sort of the very, very broad interpretation of marketing, what constitutes direct marketing, did bring into scope charities, notwithstanding, the good causes and all the rest of it. So they were subject to the strictest rules around that, and weren't able to rely on what is known as the soft opt-in, with the sort of conditional opt-in effectively, and that has now been, as I understand, opened up to the charity sector.
That's right. I very much approved this, and I've got friends in the charitable sector who very pleased about it. I know some people are not, because it might ultimately mean a general increase in the volume of spam. But effectively, yes. So the soft opt-in is a misleadingly named opt-out. Effectively, you can do certain stuff, marketing emails and so on, by if people don't tell you that you don't want them, sort of thing, then you can
Conditional
go ahead and do
opt-out, isn't
it.
it? I should have
Yeah,
said conditional
it's
opt-out. Yeah,
heavily conditional, but it's an opt-out of sorts, I
it's
think.
standard, isn't
And
it
it's
now?
now been extended to the third sector, as we call it in the UK, the charities and non-profits. So I think that's probably a good move,
Mm.
for good causes and whatnot. But you might be getting some some unwanted emails, I guess. Just click the unsubscribe, is my advice. Don't
Yeah.
make too much fuss about it. So other thing to mention about all this stuff is Pekka, the fines are going up to match the GDPR, the UK GDPR. So that's, I think the fines currently are capped at £500,000, so £500,000. They're going up effectively to £7.5 million now, maximum, or 4% of annual turnover. So whether or not the ICO will enforce the cookie law to this extent is another matter. But in theory, there are much higher fines available to them, and also all the other stuff that comes along with UK GDPR enforcement, so reprimands and so on, are available too. The last aspect of this act I thought would be worth looking at is the international data transfers piece. So just to explain what's changing in principle, and we should probably close it off quite soon, but do let us know if you have any questions, anyone. I see still got lots of people in the audience. So the standard for international data transfers, obviously this is super strict under the European data protection law. The UK Schrem's decision applies here because it kind of happened before Brexit completion day. So the ICO interprets that ruling a little bit less strictly than the European authorities, but nonetheless, it's still a very complicated process to do international data transfers well. We, of course, can help with that at Privacy Partnership, but this will change a bit under the new law. So the new test is that acting reasonably and proportionately, you can use things like the International Data Transfer Agreement, which is the UK's equivalent to standard contractual clauses, as long as the transfer will not materially lower the standard of data protection provided by UK data protection law. So you can take into account the safeguards you put in place and the nature of the personal data and the volume of it. I think we don't quite know how this is going to work out yet, but we'll see what the ICO comes up with in response, I think. What are your thoughts, Nick, about this area of law and whether this will make much difference?
Well, at this point, Rob, I think I'm going to have to just mention, bearing in mind Privacy Partnership, and the members of Privacy Partnership and the experience that we have. When you talk about the guidance from the ICO and the next generation of that, we have on the Privacy Partnership, our co-founder, Nicola McKilligan, was a colleague of mine back in the day at the ICO on the international desk, and she was involved in the policy side. I was drafting the first guidance that was issued by the ICO on international transfers. And you mentioned Boris, who's also joined Privacy Partnership Law. He wrote the second generation of guidance in my team at the ICO. So, yeah, certainly in terms of our experience as well in handling all these myriad of questions that arise in this very tricky topic. Yeah, we're well placed in Privacy Partnership, I can tell you that. And in many ways, what we now have by way of across Europe, the sort of transfer impact assessment, as difficult as they are, was a concept that was being advocated by the ICO back in the day. And yeah, it is very difficult. It was poo-poo, but this idea of having to take into account all the circumstances, and yeah, those circumstances have got more and more complicated. So anything again that can potentially simplify that, can make some of that analysis more straightforward, or certain assumptions is very welcome. But again, I have to have the same warning around the Brexit effect, if you like, and recognizing that there's very limited room for maneuver when it comes to the UK government's changes in law around this, bearing in mind that the UK has got adequacy status, which has just been reconfirmed, I believe. And if they change the goalposts too much in this area, yeah, the EU Commission will probably come down very hard on them. And as ever, I think the final thought on this topic is, as ever in this very volatile area, we are all looking with bated breath in September at the next big case that's at European level that's sort of challenging the whole framework for transatlantic data flows, certainly. So we'll keep our eyes peeled, and we certainly know what happens when the European courts determine that the current frameworks are yeah, not up to scratch. But we'll have to see
Yes.
on that. Do you want thoughts on that, Rob, without
Well,
scaring the pot?
lots to respond to there, Nick.
Everyone?
Firstly, I would echo your comments, and someone in the audience has as well about Nicola in particular. Nicola's
Yes.
great, says Chris. Wholeheartedly agree with you there. That's Nicola McKilligan Reagan, our co-founder. And I did not know that you're involved in the first tranche of data transfer guidance, Nick. I must say, the ICO, I think, I do a whole day training on the international data transfer risk assessment stuff. I think they've done a pretty good job of trying to break down the requirements. And actually, this puts that into law in a way that isn't actually present in the UK or the EU GDPR. It's just implied. So
Yeah.
it actually kind of solidifies that that standard that you can't use these transfer instruments unless they work. They are just contracts. So you have to make sure that they do have some sort of effect on data protection when using them. And we'll have to see what comes out of the ICO again, I think, with this. You're right. The UK's adequacy decision, yeah, I think that's just about confirmed now. Still has to go through the Comitology Committee, I think,
Oh,
which is quite an obscure EU institution, and also the EDPB get to weigh in, but that's not binding. But yeah, there's an upcoming case about US data transfers from Philippe Letom in France, so we'll see how that goes. Could cause a lot of chaos. And while we're on the topic, I should do a plug for Privacy Partnership. So as I hope you can see, we have a really good understanding of the UK data protection law and EU and beyond. We've got people from all over the place, consultants and lawyers and so on. So if you do need advice or help getting to grips with this or any other data privacy AI related topic, then please do get in touch. Nick works for our privacy partnership law, so we can provide legal advice too. And yeah, we'd love to hear from you if you'd like to discuss any of these changes. Sort of no strings discussion initially is fine. So Nick, any final thoughts on this? We know that it's not going to completely torpedo the UK's adequate status. We know that these changes are a bit of an evolution rather than a total groundbreaking revolution in data protection law, but I still think they are quite significant, and they will require perhaps a little bit of careful thinking from certain organizations. Any
mhm.
final thoughts before we hand back to Ben?
I think this theme around the fact that these laws, to the extent that these changes have sort of tinkered, improved, made some improvements, definitely, that reflect, whether it's case law, whether it's ICO guidance. So we know that the ICO has got a very good reputation for its guidance. It's relied upon by many practitioners, in terms of what's available. And again, we continue to look for that. So I think in that sense, the UK, from a practical perspective and guidance that's issued, is remains a leader. This law, is not reflected in specifics in across Europe, but I think still in practice you can't go too far wrong with following some of the the principles behind what's made these changes. So in certainly handling in terms of requests data subject requests. I think it's very relevant. I would just sort of just highlight another thing. It's touched upon. It's the fact that the Information Commissioner's Office is going to become the Information Commission under this. And I just have to sort of reflect
Yeah,
back on
that's true.
25 years or so, having started in, as I say, Office of Data Protection Registrar, 2001. It's been a, like the Arthur C. Clarke book, a data protection odyssey from the point of view of the ICO's branding. 2001 was a year when it changed from the Data Protection Commissioner to the Information Commissioner to the Information Commissioner's Office, all within a year. And lots of people struggled with the different changes, but it's been ICO very well established now as its brand and everything. And yeah, I hope that doesn't sort of change in terms of recognition, but as an organization, it's going to have some sort of changes at the top in terms of the way it's managed and information.
That's true. That's true. That might be one of the more significant things actually under the app, which we haven't really looked at.
More
But
in line with what other regulators, but it's certainly a long time
yes,
coming, and I think it's something that will be welcomed, in London, Wilmslow, and where they are based. So, be interesting to see how that develops.
yes, I think that probably is a good move. Whether or not it will impact enforcement, the ICO does get a little bit more room for maneuver in some respects, and also it now has the statutory right to tell data subjects that they need to complain to the controller first before coming to the ICO, which is something they've been kind of practicing for quite a long time. So there's a few little bits like that in the act as well. But the changes to the ICO, they were the one thing that I thought maybe actually could impact on the adequacy decision, but it appears they have not. So we're okay. I think it's safe to assume in that regard. So if there are any final questions, then I guess we've got a few minutes if anyone wants to ask anything. If not, then thank you so much, Nick. Really good to have your perspective
Thank you.
and benefit from the wealth of your experience and expertise. And I suppose we can hand back to Ben. Do get in touch with Privacy Partnership if you need any advice on this or any other aspect of data protection law, of course.
Thank you so much, Robert. Thank you so much, Nick. Yeah, it was a wonderful presentation. Yeah, very detailed and thorough, and there's yeah, lots to unpack there with all the complexity with now this law as well as the other laws in Europe and everything else going on. So yeah, thanks everyone for your engagement for attending. I wanted to just call out what I called out in the chat is that this session qualifies for IPP credit, so you can go to that link and put in the information there. And then yeah, I'll share my screen really quick. We have 4 webinars upcoming that I wanted to quickly plug. So we have uh, next week we were doing a full session on our app auditor product that scans apps just like we do for websites to look at all the privacy risks, see what third-party SDKs are receiving personal data based on each consent action, what data is being sent, any sensitive data that should not be sent will be flagged. So we'll dig into all of that next week. The week after, we have a privacy consultant and privacy lawyer talking about the need for continual risk monitoring despite already having a CMP. It will be interesting to see, what are the things that CMPs are designed to do in terms of capturing consent and acting on consent, but they don't necessarily verify compliance. And then September 4th, we have 2 other privacy lawyers talking about the new privacy laws in Maryland, Tennessee, Minnesota. And then September 25th, we're doing a product release preview for the first AI agents for privacy that we'll be launching later this year that will help automate assessments, automate data maps, and automate uh, privacy risk discovery. So that's all I wanted to share for today. Thank you so much for attending, and look forward to seeing you next time.